Yeah, thank you, Falguni. I had to remember to record this. But do keep putting your responses into the chat window as they go along, as your thoughts are there, and I will moderate those to Sarah. But given that it's such a small group, I would also like us to really just, go off mic and have conversations and ask our questions in person, face to face, as much as possible. And Brittany, since you are in a quiet environment, feel free to just type your chat questions in. Wonderful. Oh, hi, Shimli. That's good to see you. Shimli is also a recent alumni from the batch before the batch of disruption. So great. So without further ado, Unrehearsed Futures has been a series of conversations which are really for all of us to try and figure out how we move forward. In fact, the next conversation the next conversation is Nicole Simpson and Aiden Conrad. Aiden is from the Institute of Arts in Barcelona, and he is speaking to Nicole Simpson, who's from WAPA in Australia. And they will be talking about elevating the idea of this performer that is learning and performing online and in this digital medium, which is an interesting counterpoint, I think, to the conversation that we had with Giovanni Fussetti about 2 weeks ago, which is to really hold on to the thing in present and real time, the physical present and the co-present space, the embodied ensemble space versus this mediated environment that we're now forced to teach in. So those are the conversations we've are lined up. And then the next conversation was Faye Simpson and Sita Mani. Sita Mani is going to be asking Faye Simpson questions. Faye Simpson was the founder of the Lucid Body Technique. And she has moved into this space. And so her talk is titled How to Move Forward. But the talks that were really interesting me, which I really chose to theme around, was the ones that I've had with Janice and with Sarah today, which is this idea about how do we teach and what are we teaching for in a time of multiple and ongoing disruption, where almost the idea of planning for the future has been physically denied us because one doesn't know what's coming through the door next. And in both Sarah and Janice's cases, they have already been teaching at drama schools and now leading drama schools in spaces where disruption seems to be a part of the very everyday sort of experience. And that's why I curated these two. Sarah is also a very close comrade and friend who I've had the pleasure of meeting in person multiple times because she comes to India often. So it's really wonderful to see you again and have you here. And thank you for saying yes and doing this with us. The format, as many of you know, is there's about 15 to 20 minutes of Sarah's opening remarks. I ask a bunch of questions. I'm saying today, given the intimate nature of this room, please do throw your questions in even at this point in time, because I will use that even with my questions, even though I do have some. And as soon as we can, beyond that 20-minute mark, normally it's 40-minute mark, but as soon as we can, we will open it up to a much larger conversation where you guys can speak on different things that you are interested in talking about today. And finally, we will do a hard stop at 15 past the hour India time, which is 45 past the hour your time, wherever you are, because India is the only country in the world to have a half-hour time difference on the time zones. Sarah, thank you.
Hello everyone, and Jahan, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity of sharing our experiences. So I think it would be useful for me just to contextualize where I come from. I'm based at the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And as Jahan mentioned, I have just taken over the directorship of the center as of July this year. So it's been quite an interesting moment for me. I've virtually taken over the directorship of the center. And I think it's important for me just to contextualize the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies within the broader university. So the University of Cape Town has just under 29,000 students, 17,200 of which are undergraduates and about 11,800 are postgraduates. And we, the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies, locates in the Faculty of Humanities. And currently in the center, we have 251 students, 201 undergraduates and 50 postgraduates. And we operate across 3 campuses. So the 2 of the campuses are in fairly close proximity to one another, and the third is 10 kilometers away from the other 2. And at the center, we offer the following undergraduate academic programs. The first is a 4-year BA in theater and performance. The second is a 3-year major in theater and performance studies, which forms part of the general BA degree in the Faculty of Humanities. The third is a 3-year diploma in theater and performance, and the fourth is a 1-year advanced diploma in theater and performance. And the undergraduate curriculum is built around sort of 6 educational streams, namely acting, dance performance, performance making, which encompasses theater making and choreography, sonography, pedagogy and applied performance, and theater and dance scholarship. So in addition to the undergraduate program, we offer honors, masters, and PhD programs across a number of specialisms, including theater and performance making, directing, voice practice, applied theater and dance, playwriting, technical theater, and live and public art. Currently we have 18 permanent academic staff members who teach across undergraduate and postgraduate streams, and we have approximately 30 contract staff. So now to speak more specifically to the title of this conversation and last week's conversation, which is around pedagogy in the time of multiple disruptions. At the University of Cape Town and at most universities in South Africa, we have had a series of disruptions since 2015. So in 2015, we experienced the Rhodes Must Fall movement, which was a protest movement that began in March that year. And it was originally directed against a statue at the University of Cape Town that commemorates Cecil Rhodes. And the campaign for the statue's removal received global attention and led to a broader movement to decolonize education across South African tertiary institutions. Later in 2015, we saw the advent of the Fees Must Fall movement, which was a student-led protest, or a student-led protest movement that grew out of the Rhodes Must Fall movement. And the goals of the campaign were to stop increases in student fees, as well as to increase government funding of universities within the larger frame of decolonization. And the Fees Must Fall movement continued into 2016, and in October of that year, our particular, one of our campus, our main campus, where I locate, was occupied for roughly 2 months. And the university shut down from mid-September to the end of the year, which meant we didn't finish the academic year. So I think it's important to note that in South Africa, our academic year starts in February, unlike most global North universities, which the academic year starts in, I think, August. So we start our academic year in February. Now, because we didn't finish our academic year in 2016, we had to finish the 2016 academic year at the beginning of 2017. So which meant we started the 2017 academic year later than usual. Then in 2017, there was another smaller Fees Must Fall protest, which took place in October, and the campus was closed for roughly 2 weeks. However, we did manage to finish the 2017 year. 2018, there were no protests, so there was some respite. And then in 2019, a first-year student was gang raped and brutally murdered at a local post office by a post office employee. And this sparked a series of protests against gender-based violence and femicide in South Africa. So the campus closed for about a week, and we did in this instance, also managed to finish the year. So when in March this year, our president announced a very strict lockdown, although this was, was a very different context to the other protests, it felt like we had been here before. So, but what the COVID pandemic has done, I think, is bring the questions of equity and accessibility to the fore. It's highlighted the inequalities that are so pervasive in South Africa, the inequalities that the protests I speak of were about. For example, gender-based violence in South Africa has increased exponentially during this lockdown period. So as a center, when lockdown was announced and we needed to shut down the university, we made a decision not to teach any of our studio work or practical courses online, and to instead focus on our theory courses, which we could teach asynchronously. So given the questions of accessibility and equality, and lack of equality, the university issued a directive that all classes should be taught asynchronously. So what we did was to put together maintenance plans for our studio work courses. So physical and vocal maintenance programs were provided, and students were encouraged to engage in a form of self-study. Now, the emphasis on asynchronous learning makes complete sense when a large majority of our students come from underserved communities. Many of our students live in remote areas where access to the internet is dodgy. The bandwidth doesn't allow for any kind of synchronous connectivity. And many of our students live in very, very small homes with many people. In some instances, 1 or 2 rooms shared between 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe more people. So, the university did make provision for loan laptops to students who didn't have a laptop or a device to work from. And the university also entered into agreements with major mobile service providers, and students were provided with relatively large data bundles on a monthly basis. What transpired, however, was that in many instances, the data and the laptop would be shared amongst family members. So sometimes, the bulk of the bundles were for nighttime data, which meant students had to work late into the night and early hours of the morning. And the data would run out before the end of the month, before the next installment. Now, for students who live in homes that have Wi-Fi, there were very few challenges. And I think this really highlights the inequities that are prevalent in our university and by extension, society, or South Africa more broadly. From the onset of the lockdown at the end of March, we as a center made it very clear to the dean of the faculty in the first instance and the university exec in the second that we would not be able to finish the year if we could not get our students back onto campus by September at the latest. We also figured that if we managed to get those students who usually live in residence back to residence, then we could start a blended approach to teaching that involves synchronous online teaching combined with contact face-to-face teaching. And so this way we could implement a phased and a staggered approach to the return of students to campus. So we managed, after much toing and froing, to get the university executive to agree to this. And it was, I guess it was also aided by the president of the country's announcement at that time that we would enter into lockdown level 2 from the 18th of August, which, interprovincial travel was then allowed. And it was also announced by the Department of Higher Education and Training that 66% of university students could return to campus. So all courses that require students to be in lab type teaching spaces, such as our courses, were allowed to return. So in September, we started the blended teaching model. I must say at this point, it has been quite a feat to put together a schedule that spans different campuses and that takes into consideration a phased and staggered opening. And it was even more of a feat putting together the health and safety protocols and necessary PPE. I feel like I've become a bit of a COVID PPP expert in the process. Now, we started with online synchronous teaching of our studio work courses in September, and we had our first cohort of students come back onto campus this last Monday, so it's all very new. And I can't really report on how the blended approach has or is working at this point. I think we need a little more time to be able to critically reflect on it. So, you know, the university, why I found it important at the beginning of this talk or conversation to contextualize our center within the university is that the university is, if I dare say, a bit of a bureaucratic monster. You know, to get anything done requires it to be signed off at numerous levels. So, my entry into this position as director of the center in July, in the middle of lockdown, feels like it has been a bit of a baptism by fire. Yeah, and this, just as I said earlier, kind of having to familiarize myself with all of these COVID health and safety PPE things, it feels like I've become this health and safety expert, which wasn't in my job description when I agreed to take on this position. But anyway, here we are. But, you know, that having said, my experience of teaching online has been fantastic. I've surprised myself. It's been a very positive experience, quite extraordinary, and surprisingly intimate. I'm really surprised at how much I experience and feel through the lens of the laptop camera, and how connected I feel. I was initially very skeptical, but I think my skepticism has been somewhat allayed by the practice. So, in terms of going forward, and in particular addressing and actioning questions of recurriculation, because I think that's the big question, is how do we shift, how do we change our curriculum? And in fact, it's an important moment for us, because the protests, student protests, were around decolonizing the curriculum, and I don't think we have yet fully decolonized the curriculum. And I think this gives us a really important moment. It's this kind of the COVID pandemic has come at an important moment and provided us with the opportunity of really looking at our curriculum and trying to understand what a decolonial curriculum looks like. So, what I have done so far is I've implemented a curriculum task group that involves both students and academic staff. I think it's important that students are actively engaged in this process. We need to hear from students what they feel they need to learn going forward. What skills and technologies that they feel they need to become versed in. I mean, look, theatre has survived pandemics before, so I have no doubt that theatre in the fullness of its live form will return. When it will return, I have no idea. However, I think, although our president last night announced that we would be moving into lockdown level 1 on Monday, which means that theatres can reopen and can accommodate up to 50% of their usual audience capacity. So we are going to return soon. But I think we do need to plan for an intermediary phase, because there may be a second wave. We may suddenly be catapulted into another hard lockdown. I don't know. So this idea of planning for an intermediary phase is where I think, the importance of the students who we teach playing a crucial role becomes important. And we need to think about coming up, I think, with a new genre that isn't quite film and isn't quite theatre as we know it, but rather something that sits in between the two. What it looks like, And the shape it takes is what I'm interested in exploring together with the students. You know, Zoom performances are popping up all over, recorded performances as well. Our National Arts Festival in South Africa went online earlier this year, and the idea, which is known as the V Fringe, was established to create a digital platform for artists to share their work with home-based audiences. You know. So there were some teething problems, but on the whole, there was some incredible recorded work that was made available to a broader audience. So artists are doing it. But I think this is the perfect opportunity for us as an academic institution to actively engage in shaping the future of the theatre and performance industry in South Africa, instead of letting it guide what we teach. You know, in other words, letting it guide the processes of training performers for an existing industry. You know, currently, the industry is emergent, and we need to respond to this. So, and I think that we, you know, are well positioned to do this as an institution that foregrounds the importance of practice as research, as an institution that teaches a discipline that is based on responsiveness. We are well positioned, I would say. So I think I'm going to leave it at that, Jahan, if that's okay with you.
I think so. I think I do have multiple questions already to start with. And just a reminder to everyone else in the room, as you hear the conversation, feel free to type your questions in, or in a little bit also raise your hand and get yourself off mic, and we'll just have a conversation. There's a small enough number here. The first question, I think, is, let's just talk about the relationship between the center and the university. I mean, this was also spoken. There's this idea that most of the drama schools, which are part of larger frameworks and larger institutional structures, are automatically sort of hamstrung by the conditions of that existence. Bureaucratic, permissions, curriculum, a university that is getting their accreditation out of a college in Singapore that's getting their accreditation out of a university in Liverpool, for example, Felipe. They can make certain changes, but then they still have to get all the curriculums repurposed and rechecked. So I get this sense of, and the drama school is a small studio school. We were pursuing accreditation like the gold standard that we so needed so badly. And when we went into lockdown and had to start thinking anew, I was personally so thrilled that I didn't have that, because it allowed me to be so much more responsive. But in the toing and froing, do you feel like there is, do you think that the institution as a whole, or maybe your department, is going to help the institution as a whole find a higher level of responsiveness, where the checking and the counter checking and the clearances and all, a new mechanism emerges that allows to work in a time of disruption?
I hope so. But I mean, I think it's important also to say that in the broader context of the university and the institution, there's a plan on the table. There was, prior to COVID-19, there was the Vice Chancellor's 2030 vision, which points to a more blended approach to, and kind of digitized approach to teaching and learning. Obviously, we need to be in contact space to do what we do, but we could possibly look at some kind of blended approach. There's what's also been put on the table is the idea of transforming teaching and learning spaces, live teaching and learning spaces, into more friendly, kind of spaces where people can engage, rather than terrible lecture halls where the lectures are all kind of in raked seating facing the lecturer, which is currently what the situation is. So they're talking about, we need to have, open spaces where people can move and people can interact, which is of course what we do. So to answer part of your question, I think that we can certainly lead the way in assisting other departments and other faculties to understand what this entails and how you teach, kind of how the teaching practice can be a far more embodied experience for both the lecturers and students. So there is a plan. In fact, right after this, I need to go to a Dean's Special Special Dean's Advisory Committee to talk about the proposed blended learning approach to teaching and learning in 2021. So, you know, things are shifting, which means that if we do need to change our curriculum, hopefully we won't have to wait 2 years, because we've got a blue handbook, and to change anything in the blue handbook, which is a university-wide handbook, or it's actually faculties, our faculty one is blue, it takes 2 years to change anything. So if you want to make any significant changes to a course, you have to put in your requests 2 years prior to the change actually being implemented. Now, a number of things can happen in the space between, you know, but it doesn't really come. So I'm hoping that that with what the pandemic will do is allow us to speed up those kinds of processes, those kinds of bureaucratic processes. I still think we're still going to have to go through the various levels of, you know, things being signed off. I don't think we're going to avoid that. That's just, look, that's for me kind of the inherent structures of, or kind of the hierarchical structures of universities.
Yeah.
Certainly the that I am, is colonial. You know? So.
Well, I have two questions that come from that moment, because one is this idea of, well, you know, we have to change the curriculum 2 years in advance. You just spoke of the idea of now, in terms of relevance of what we're preparing the students for, being of not just for theater, which will come back, we don't know when, right? But now for this new medium, this space in between, the live presence show, but yet not film, the live performing media studies, the mediated live space. I mean, we can spend all day thinking about what this new genre is. But my point is, if we don't even know that, and yet the students are coming through the door now, and they're graduating soon, I mean, in your case, 4 years, in my case, 1 year, 2 years, I have to have a curriculum that's preparing them for something that's within the window before the curriculum approval process.
So in some instances, sorry to cut in there,
yeah.
we can shift, we can make shifts within the, we try and keep our course descriptions quite broad, so that we can allow for changes to happen, you know, and we don't have to wait for 2 years. We can just we can change the course, and it still fits within the course description in the blue book, right?
Okay.
But I do think there are going to be some courses that so we do have spaces. We have some courses where we could, we certainly could, there's space for us to bring in this kind of, whatever we call it, mediated approach, or whatever we call it, to teaching. But there are going to be some instances where we're going to have to change the courses quite significantly. And this is where I'm hoping that the turnaround won't be as long as 2 years, because we find ourselves, you know, it's coming out of a pandemic. And the pandemic is calling for us to be far more responsive, to act more quickly. So I'm hoping.
I think that call is not just for theater departments, but for tertiary education as a whole. Exactly.
I mean, one of the things I wanted to say was, I think, you know, within the larger university and within the larger tertiary institution, you know, if we've got to make ourselves relevant, because if there are austerity cuts, I have a sense that the creative and performing arts may be the first departments that they go to cut.
That's not new news.
No, it's not new news. So but the thing is, how do we make ourselves relevant? And I think one of the things I've been speaking quite a lot about is as a center, I think what we need to do is collaborate with departments within the Faculty of Humanities and other faculties, and to share our research methods. Because my experience is that, you know, I was working with I'm working on a joint research project with someone from the African Gender Institute and other universities from around the world to kind of locate within the social sciences. And they are completely blown away by practice as research, as a methodology, as a research methodology. And I'm like, but we've been doing this for over 20 years. So I think we have quite a lot to offer, and I think we need to be strategic so that we make ourselves kind of indispensable in a way that in terms of, because so much emphasis and value is placed on research within these academic institutions.
You're about to, you please send me the photos of what a bunch of PhDs in a theater workshop looks like. I really want to see it. It'll be fun because I mean, because that's when the minds go explode. I'm gonna come back to something because we talked about also the university structure being colonial, and that itself needs to decolonize. So I'm gonna ask you to now take us through three things. One is a question on the fact that it seems the pandemic has accelerated the changes that you felt were always required. And because you talk about roads must fall, but the recurriculuming of roads must fall seems to be happening now. Did it not happen then, or what is accelerated now? And give us a little bit of a sense of that. The second one is, of course, you brought this up. It was about gender and about the rape case that happened, and about how in the pandemic this has become so acute again, gender violence. So in both these contexts, what is happening with your curriculum and your recurriculum? Give us those stories.
Okay. So, I mean, the curriculum, departments and faculties did respond to both the roads must fall and the fees must fall movements, which were rooted in the project of decolonizing, of decoloniality, and within the context of the university, decolonizing the curriculum. Departments have started to respond, but my sense is that it's a bit of a band-aid situation. That maybe teachers are changed, so there's in terms of employment equity, a whole lot of things have changed around that, and emphasis is placed on employing Black South Africans. So, that's, and women particularly. But we have a case in our department where we've got a number of Black South African women employed. So, obviously it would change per department. But so in terms of staffing, in terms of the curriculum, things have changed, starting to change, but I don't think they have changed fast enough. And this is certainly the students' view. The students feel that the whole process of decolonization hasn't been as rigorous as they were pushing for. So what I'm saying, because the students don't really understand this 2-year process that I was speaking of earlier, that it takes so long to change something.
They want it now.
Yeah. So I think, things have slowly been shifting and changing, but I think this moment where we are being asked by the university center, the university exec, to think about new approaches to teaching, which encompass a blended approach, to use their term, will require that we have to change the curriculum. Those two things go hand in hand. And in fact, a report just came in from Senate. I read it about an hour ago, that said exactly that the process of changing the curriculum changed and kind of transitioning to a blended approach to teaching, which involves online and contact teaching, work together. These processes worked. So I think the university exec is telling us, giving us the cue that this is the time to really think about how we, think about the process of recurriculation. And that, for me, is the perfect opportunity to really understand, if it is possible, what a decolonial curriculum looks like. And that's why I'm saying that I don't think we can do it without the students.
Well, then, I mean, tell us more about how you're. See, I mean, what I've understood is in the UK, and this is where I think that UK practitioners and American practitioners in the room, you guys have been facing the whole Black Lives Matter movement recently, and it'd be good to have. I mean, this is an opportunity to talk to someone who's dealing with students who've been working with race injustice and gender injustice for ages. But coming from the students and the curriculum, what's happening with, like, I found myself having a thought where I almost want to just deliberately stay away from all the canonical texts going forward. And I lament it because at one level, I feel like in the canonical text, there's just so much craft and so much artistic beauty in terms of what those are and what they offer for mining and for learning. It's such a great site to learn from a Shakespeare text, for example, or from a Brecht. But at the same time, I almost feel like at this point in time, what are the students' responses telling us in terms of their creative responses? How are their creative outputs? What is the relationship between the canonical text, which we see a certain pedagogical value to, and then the students' own creative impulses and what they are creating when you send them on a theater making task, or when you send them on a devising task or a writing task, and how they are responding to the rape, the roads must fall, the fees must fall, and other issues that are really important to them in this time. And how do those things how do we make how do we make those things work together for the final amazingness, which in my head is a student in today's day and age who can speak of their times and express their times with the kind of craft and skill and brilliance that we learn from a Shakespeare or a Brecht or a Williams or whoever.
So, I mean, there are quite a lot of questions in there. I mean, I think
I
in
know,
terms
I'm sorry.
I mean, we have a very strong theater making stream, and that's about students finding their own signature as theater makers, as performance makers, whether it's choreography or, because I think it's important also to remember that well, I didn't say this, but we recently merged with the School of Dance to become the same. So we're no longer a drama school. We are a much kind of
Performing arts school.
Performing arts school, yeah. So about the theater making stream is about finding your signature as a theater maker, performance maker, choreographer, and that's often where you will see the kind of injustices in society are reflected in the work that students make. In terms of the acting stream, yes. So to speak about the canonical texts, I mean, our second year acting studio focus is on extended language, heightened text, heightened emotions. And of course, Shakespeare and the Greek tragedies are fantastic for that. So there are a couple of ways, and I want to add here as well, there are some beautiful canonical, I think I can call them canonical texts in isiXhosa, which is the one. We have 11 languages, official languages in South Africa, which is the African language of the Western Cape, which is where the University of Cape Town locates. So we offer, and we have been offering actor training and theater maker training in English. So everybody does the unilingual course, and then in either isiXhosa or Afrikaans. So Afrikaans is kind of, it's a very complex language because it's kind of inherited from the Dutch. So can be seen as a colonial language, but yet a large part of the population, indigenous population, people indigenous to South Africa speak Afrikaans and have claimed that the language is their language. So it's a complex language, and that's a whole nother conversation, but we offer, to get back to the center, we offer acting and theater making in 3 languages. And there are both in Afrikaans and isiXhosa, there are beautiful heightened texts that could be seen as canonical. So on the one hand, we engage with indigenous languages and the heightened texts that are offered in those languages. And then the other, we work with adaptation and translation. So a few years ago, we translated Macbeth into isiXhosa. And it worked beautifully. And the students were involved in the translation of the text together with, at that time, we had an honor student who was focusing on translation. So he came in and mentored the students. So, and then also adapting to speak to your idea about, you know, the Greek tragedies, for example, and a lot of the Shakespeare's as well, can speak to what's happening. I feel like we're living in a Greek tragedy, in fact.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of those texts speak to what's happening in our society, in our lives. And so how do we adapt those? How do we contextualize those? So there's a lot of adaptation, contextualization, translation, this idea of translation, not only language, translation of language, but how do you translate across kind of contexts? How do you translate bodies in the spaces? So I think, you know, it's interesting for me that our senior acting teachers, all of the acting teachers bar one at the moment are actually theatre makers, and we tend to make work with the acting students. The last person who's very big on kind of canonical and classical texts to teach acting is about to retire at the end of the year. So I'm curious to see where that's going to take the school in terms of, you know, we quite, I think that in South Africa, we're seen as one of the strongest universities to produce actors, you know, but I'm not too sure what that's going to mean. And I think we also have to think about, you know, I've always felt that we should just teach theatre making, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I'm
and you
in
can
complete
teach acting
agreement with that.
theatre.
You teach acting within it because, yeah. I mean,
and
that's...
sorry, one more thing, that in the theatre making stream, students often work with canonical texts and adapt them in the theatre making stream and rewrite them. So
I'm gonna two questions now, I think. The first one is to do with this genre. I mean, we've had the conversations now amongst many people where what is this thing that we're leaving behind, or what is the thing that is going on the shelf or into the basement for a time, a period of time, as long as the pandemic is here. You've had Anthony Fauci, in the CDC guy in the States, say you can't expect theaters to open till fall of next year. India, they could open them tomorrow based on political compunctions, and because this pandemic is more political and economic than it is medical. But, you know, they're going to open theaters whenever they do, but I don't see anyone, you know, I don't see the industry taking off again for another 36 months, 24 months at least. So I'm quite pessimistic about this. So that's gone for a while. And now I have this duty to train these students for something else. One of the contentions that comes up is that if we're initiating new students into this space, and they have never seen or experienced that absolute live medium, the way we always taught, we never imagined teaching in a Zoom environment, then what are we leaving behind, and are we able to be responsible about it in a way, or have we truly lost something and never to be regained again? Because we'll never entirely come out of this new space that we're in. What are your thoughts on that? Because you just came from a class and you just spoke about, I'm kind of really holding you up to this. You spoke to, you know, the intimacy, the surprise of this medium and all of that, and it's wonderful. But we got to know each other in Adi Shakti at Pondicherry, in possibly one of the most demanding places for the requirement of personal presence. You know, a retreat far away from everywhere, where we could just be with each other, share a space, learn, breathe, feel, all of that in our working together. You came from that tribe, and now you come into this space. What are your where are your conflicts about it?
I mean, look, I think that I am able to have the experiences that I'm having now online with the students because I know them. I have been teaching them for 2 and a bit years. So I know them. I think the question of new students coming in is another question. We are hanging on to the hope that we will be able to bring them into a live contact space.
If you can't, then what?
You can't, well then I feel like that's we're gonna have to deal with that when we get to there. And I suppose the only option will be Zoom. But then for me, I agree with you, it takes away completely. I do think that, and I probably should have said this earlier, that the only reason that I can have the experiences that I'm having with the students on Zoom is because we know one another. We've been in class together for just over 2 years. I have to tell you the truth, Jahan, I haven't even thought about that because I don't want to think about it, to be quite honest. I just want to, as you know, I'm hoping that, you know, as from Monday, theaters are going to be open in South Africa. From Monday.
I'm very envious.
Please, let's hope that we don't have, as I said, if we have another a second wave, then that there is a problem. But it seems like Africa has defied the rest of the world's predictions around COVID-19 and projected deaths. So let's hope we continue to defy the rest of the world in terms of a second wave. So I think we would have to teach online. There would be no other option. But the bigger question for us is, if students are sent back home and they're not able to be in residence, because those students who live in remote areas and do not have access to Wi-Fi, reliable Wi-Fi, tend to live in residence. Those students who come from poorer conditions, from underserved communities, live in residence. So if they can't be in residence, then we cannot teach synchronously. And then it's like, we may as well not even begin to try and teach any of our studio work courses. We may as well just teach our theory courses until such time as we can either come into a synchronous space, which means they would need to come back to residence, or into contact teaching mode. And then we would have to seriously rethink, maybe we'd have to teach the theory, all of the theory in the first half of the year, and then just do practice in the second half of the year. You know, and that's me thinking on the fly now.
I know that, but on the fly, you're still thinking about teaching for finally theater, teaching for finally performing arts.
Yeah.
But what if this is also telling us that if they're not coming back, if this situation continues to stay the way it is, if, you know, level 1 is just in India, it's Unlock 4.0, they're calling it over here. And
Unlock what? 4.
Yeah, it's like technical releases of data, right? 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. So, and that's a media thing, because the media is basically telling us what to say and think. It's not a government thing, but it's called Unlock 4.0. It started on the 1st of September. By the way, just to let you know, many people's behavior has not changed from Unlock 1, from lockdown. Now, our behavior is still the same because
you have it the other way around. You had one, so
lockdown
one is was the severe lockdown.
So for us, it's just it's unlocks going in increasing numbers. But I'm gonna open it up to Vidur's question, and then please, anyone who has questions, do start to ask. But I just wanted to say, if we stay in this state, Sarah, and I know you're thinking on the fly, but this is the whole point, is that we're not expecting anyone to have all the answers. This is all unrehearsed. What does your department start to teach them for instead of theater? And if that's the case, do you want to continue? Personally, does that still excite and interest you to go into these uncharted new spaces and new worlds of storytelling and expression, or is it one bridge too many, one disruption too many?
I think we would need to, I would definitely say we would continue because as I said earlier, I think it's an intermediary phase. I think theatre will return. And I think, I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, maybe we have to, you know, students need to figure out radio is a fantastic medium, for example. And we've actually just purchased a whole, and the equipment was approved just before lockdown. So the budget was approved to purchase a whole lot of equipment to revamp our recording studio because we haven't done any radio or audio work in a long time. And as a voice teacher, I mean, that's my main area of pedagogy. I'm quite excited about the possibility of exploring audio performance. So I think that's one thing is, so audio, not just radio, but podcasts, audios, radio dramas, whatever. And then, I don't know, maybe we need to train young people or the students how to make their own YouTube channels. That's a possibility. I don't know. I don't know what TikTok is about. I'm a little bit, my children know what it's about, but I have no idea. And I don't think I'm interested in going that route. But you know, maybe there's something there. I don't know. This idea of live, I think we need to explore other platforms other than Zoom. I don't know if there are any other platforms out there that, or maybe maybe somebody will design another platform that is more user-friendly for live performance.
The last I heard, there are a number of theatre makers in the UK talking directly to the technicians at Zoom to see how Zoom can change up in order to support these kind of present performances. That was happening.
And then conceptual work, conceptualizing projects, installations that can happen online, not live, digitized art, digital art. I think there are a number of things we would, and that's why what I was saying earlier, I think it's important to sit with the students to find out what skills they need. And what things do they know that I don't know about in terms of this digital media? Because I think they're probably more versed in it than me. You know, we recently, with the theatre company that I run, we recently implemented a project of making short films on your mobile phone, like solo films on your mobile phone. And then editing everybody's solo film into one film. So you find, you know, there's a writing component, there's a conceptual component, and then you write the narrative, and you go off and you film what you need to do, and then you collaboratively edit the thing. So, you know, currently we teach our students to acting for camera, but they don't know how to necessarily make their own. But films that are not, I mean, I don't know if it would be, maybe we need to, this other genre I talk about is something we need to explore. If it's not film and it's not theater, what is it?
I mean, Janice said something about the discovery that this camera, this little dot at the top of our laptop, was just completely different from any other camera. So when I say acting for camera, it's not this camera. This is a whole other eye, exactly. And a whole other magnifying glass.
Lighting and a set and all of that, you know.
Yeah.
Which...
So Vidur has I mean, I still have 1,000 questions because I want to dig deeper. But still, by the way, yeah. So Vidur has a question. Vidur, this is a mouthful, but I'm going to try and say this, and it's in your chat window as well, Sarah.
I'm reading it, but say it while I read it.
In Abolishment of the English Department, Ngugi talks about the role of language in penetrating canon inside the culture of education. Are you able to practice alternatives to spoken and written language in the medium of communication for facilitating theatre practice? What processes does one follow in shifting the medium of communication? So you're saying outside spoken and written language, are you, Vidur?
Yeah, I'm talking about that, how like in the spoken and the written language, we prefer English as the medium of communication. Of course, we have the canon. Even in theater, we would be reading Stanislavski or Brecht, but the medium of communication is still English. So are you following certain processes to sort of also cause that shift? Because I mean, in literature, I felt divided about Achebe and Googie talking about it, but how does it take shape in education and pedagogy when it comes to theater? That's what my question is.
I mean, it's happening in the studio work courses, in the practical courses, where yeah, and as I say, we are working with texts in languages other than English, and students are writing or performing in texts other than English. And there's also a huge emphasis on physical theater, which is a whole other language, which doesn't require the written or spoken language. But the bigger question, Vidur, is, and this is something that the university is starting to tackle, and as a department, as a center we are, is around the theoretical, the teaching of theoretical courses and the writing of essays and theses in languages other than English, because the university has claimed that the medium of instruction is English. So therefore, we need to, exams need to be written in English, essays need to be written in English, dissertations need to be written in English, but this is being contested. And we have had a couple of cases, I think recently, where in South Africa, a student got their doctoral degree written in isiXhosa or Zulu, one of the indigenous languages. So there is a move. There's a big move within universities in South Africa, and in particular in Cape Town, at the University of Cape Town, we have got a language task team, a faculty language task team, and a university-wide language task team, and we've just put together a language task team in our center to address these very questions. We are not there yet, but we certainly are grappling with them. And Jehan has met a colleague of mine, Mandla Mbotwe, who is spearheading this. This is something he's deeply passionate about, not just the teaching of practical courses, but the teaching of theoretical courses and the production of knowledge. That has to be, we have to look at indigenous knowledge systems and also producing new knowledge in indigenous languages. We're far from being there, but it is on the table.
So just another one that came to mind, because we spoke about it. You took over as head of department, and the first thing you were handed was the crisis. Yeah, and that was, that's enough to make anyone go ah. But when in our pre-talk, you spoke about the opportunities it presented you. And I know that in all of this talk, you've spoken about how right now recurricularization, almost becoming a PPE and medical expert is is becoming the skill sets and is taking all your time and energy. But if you really, if this is the only moment you have to create to make the most of the changes that you can bring in, using the pandemic as a excuse, or using the pandemic as a lever for that change, what would you put on your top 3 priority lists? Because all of the stuff you speak of is of a much longer game. So what becomes super important to you?
I mean, and this is something that I was speaking about when I knew that I was going to come into this position, and before the pandemic, before I knew there was going to be such a thing as COVID-19. And
so
in a way,
so you're saying, for the record, you didn't orchestrate COVID-19?
No.
Okay, good. Just checking.
But I had been thinking about this, but the pandemic highlighted the importance of creating communities of care. So for me, that is, if I have a 3-year tenure, and it may be extended for another 3 years if people want me to stay and if I want to stay. I feel that it's becoming increasingly important to create communities of care, and particularly on our campus. I think that that students are, and precisely because of all of the social inequities and the gender violence.
Can you elaborate a little bit what you mean by a community of care and
So,
how
so
you
what I'm
imagine
saying is,
that being created?
for me, the campus is quite fragmented in that students often don't feel safe. South Africa is a very violent society. So just to use a very practical example, you know, when you rehearse late at night until 10 o'clock, and then to have to wait for a shuttle that's going to take you back to your residence that's 10 kilometers away, and sometimes you're waiting in a quite an unprotected area, and sometimes the shuttle doesn't arrive on time, and sometimes the shuttle drops you off far away from your residence and you have to walk to your residence. So these are things like, how do we shift those bureaucratic systems within the university? So how do I speak to the transport service and make sure that they have a shuttle that drops the students at their residence rather than at one central point, and at 10 o'clock they're finding themselves having to walk home in the dark when it's unsafe.
So you're speaking of an institutional culture. You're speaking of...
Yeah, it's institutional culture, but so I'm talking about the broader university. Also, you know, better still, maybe I've always wanted to, you know, when I visited NSD for the first time, I loved the fact that there was a campus there, a residence there on campus or close to campus where the students lived. So how do you create, if we could have a residence close to our satellite campus where students live together, work together, ate together. There was a sense of collective, I suppose, living and sharing. Creating a vegetable garden, a food garden, is something I'm wanting to do. Having a morning session where students come together and do kind of community work, where you work in the garden or you run a set. I don't know what it is yet, but it's just an idea, so that we create this community that is not just about going into class to learn skills and techniques, but it's about caring for one another in an environment that is becoming increasingly uncaring. And I really feel that and I suppose it's because, you know, our main campus is a satellite campus away from the main university campus. So where you came, Jahan, I think.
Yeah.
You came.
Yes, I came.
You know, it's 10 kilometers away from the main university campus. It's a satellite campus. We have the space, I believe, to really experiment with what it means to create communities of care that are based on relationality and about connection. Everything that we teach in the classroom, you know, theater is relational. It's about connection in a world that is becoming increasingly disconnected, and young people who are becoming increasingly disconnected. And you can see it in the high levels of depression amongst the young people that I teach. Yeah, so for me, how do we take what we teach in the classroom but expand it to the whole campus and really explore what it means to be a relational campus, relational beings that occupy the space together, to explore what connection really means outside of the classroom, where I'm having to offer you my weight and you need to support me. But when I walk out, and that's between academic staff, administrative staff and students, the whole community, the cleaners, the gardeners. I really feel passionate about, and if that's what I leave, if that's something that I can achieve after 3 years of being in there, because I think it's going to feed the pedagogical project at the end of the day.
I think in terms of the pandemic, it forced us. I mean, when we were hand-holding the batch that went out, it forced us to suddenly become a lot more, like, we were getting more and more structured and pedagogical in our work. And we were very delighted with it because it meant that we were achieving a certain rigor and discipline as an institution. But one of the things that happened immediately was we had to throw up everything we'd planned. And first look after them pastorally and like look after their well-being and sort of, see how they're doing and see if they're safe and sheltering in place before we could get to, well, now what? And that forced us to go immediately into this community of care situation. So I do see the value to that completely. I had just a follow on in this pandemic moment, since that has how does that allow you to really advance this agenda, one? And two, does the mediated space allow you, because Vidur had a really interesting question which made me think about this also, this architecture of care idea. Does the online campus offer a further opportunity for the community of care to be created?
I'm reading here. I think this idea of blurring geographical boundaries is an interesting one. I mean, I was just saying to my partner, I said, well, I'm going to India now, and later I'm going to the UK at 5 o'clock in South African time. So,
yeah.
But this idea of blurring boundaries and opening up space is an interesting thing to explore. I mean, because there's this idea of this experience of disconnect that I speak about feels to be exacerbated by the online space. Well, at least that's what I think it does. But I think there are ways of countering that.
How do you take my weight right now?
How do you take my, exactly? Well, maybe I don't know how. I don't know how I'm going to take your weight.
Not literally. You know what I mean?
I know, because I mean, I often feel like I'm doing this stuff in class and the students seem all fine, but when I click leave the meeting or end meeting for all, I have no idea what state I've really left them in, what they are left with. Whereas in a class, there's you have a real tangible sense of closing the space, even though we do that online. I don't know. I mean, I think I don't know how we're going to do it online. One of the things we did do right at the beginning of the lockdown was we called the students and spoke to them rather than sending emails. And they said they couldn't believe that we had done that, because no other lecturer in any other department because they take other courses in other departments, had contacted them. So I think because of, we are such a relational, what we do is so relational, that this was the most obvious thing for us to do. But to sustain that is really challenging, because then suddenly, as academic staff, we suddenly had to redesign all of our courses and translate them into online courses. And it was a huge learning curve for all of us and took up a hell of a lot of time. And then you suddenly think, oh my God, what about the students? I haven't even thought about the students. I'm thinking about what I'm going to teach them online, but I haven't thought about their well-being right now. So where am I going to get the time to call? And I must say, since we started teaching synchronously, it feels like I have more of a sense of what's happening with the students. They are reaching out to me more regularly. But yeah, I really hope we don't have to stay in this online space for longer than, I don't know.
And if you could advise on how to collaborate and learn and work in times. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to hold to that one. I'm going to. So there's this thought of, okay, theater's going to come back. We know this, right? Which survived pandemics, which has been successfully dying. It's been unsuccessfully dying for 3,000 years. 3,000 years, people have used the line, oh, theater's a dying medium. Yes, we're very dramatic about our death. The curtain hasn't come down on it yet. And I don't think it's going to come down now. But whilst we're here, what are we holding for? What are we going to keep skilling them for in the 6 months or in the year? I am looking at the prospect of, we've just announced our 1-year program. We've broken into 2 semesters, and we've just announced a standalone foundation course purely delivered in the digital medium. But luckily, the pedagogy is such that we will still be able to take that course and deliver it in a blended medium or an in-person medium. So we just focused, we took a pedagogy first approach, but we focused on the individual. We don't know yet what the advanced program is. We're imagining residential, we're imagining ensemble, because we just need to get back into a room really badly. What if we can't? I still come back to that. I'm sorry, I keep coming back to that because I'm asking this question for myself. What if we can't? And then fine, but theater won't come back. Maybe it'll come back next year. So I still have another 6 months where I have to take these students on some further journey. Or maybe I say, no, you know what, you have enough for now, just go and do something else and we'll meet again when we reconvene. But otherwise, if I have to hold them or keep developing them and keep having meaningful knowledge and experiential and embodied knowledge generation with them, what am I giving them for the time when theater comes back?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's in a sense what we experienced in the second quarter of our year. So when we decided not to teach our studio work courses, and we focus primarily on the theory courses. But I mean, I say theory courses, but a lot of the theory courses have practical kind of conceptual thinking components to them.
Practices research.
Yeah, so you know, we'd set them tasks, and instead of writing a whole lot of stuff, they'd have to audio record and upload things or take photographs and come up with a conceptual design for a text and use whatever's in the wardrobe and to come up with costume design or construct a set from whatever you can find around you, because at that point you could hardly go to the shops, you know, to buy anything. It was hard lockdown. So I think we would have to, if we couldn't come back, you know, if we suddenly entered into a second wave and we went back into a hard lockdown, we would have to go back to the model that we started with, focusing on the theory courses, but trying to make it, and it would have to be asynchronous, because if students were at home, they wouldn't all have access to reliable Wi-Fi or bandwidth, you know, even if the university gives them data, the bandwidth often is not great, so you can't teach synchronously. So asynchronous with very clear tasks, we would have to, you know, use our learning platforms and create interactive videos. You know, they all are what's it called? Free, where you don't have to pay for data. There's a word for it. I forget what it is now.
Freemium or something.
Yeah, so because they're on our university Vula platform, the platform that we communicate with students on, is zero rated. That's the word I'm looking at. Is zero rated. So therefore we can put our videos on there, zero rated. They don't pay for data. Ask them to be creative about how they respond to things, and do the theory courses, and give them maintenance programs and say, this is self-study. So do videos. And I mean, I spent hours recording myself doing all of the exercises with my child on the phone, filming me, you know, and uploading these videos, routines for students to do. And I think we're going to have to be creative like that, because then we won't be able to be in a synchronous classroom if there is a hard lockdown. So if there isn't, we have, I mean, look, if we stay with sort of the 66% of being allowed back on campus, we fall within the medical students who need to be on campus, and other students who need lab spaces. The performing and creative arts are given priority to return, which is thank heavens for that. So we have been given the priority. We have been prioritized to return. We have returned. Most of the students are still working from home remotely, but we have returned. So then we can, you know, really think about a blended approach. But if worst comes to worst, we'll have to go back to what we did right at the beginning of lockdown and just make it a whole lot better. I think we've learned a little bit. It's a lot of work, I must say. And we also need to get tutors involved. I got my tutors involved in a concept scene project, and it was fantastic for the tutors to make interactive videos so that the students weren't constantly seeing me, but there were peers that were, you know, giving them instructions or, so it's, I'm not going to let go of this thing that it's interim.
No, that's fair enough. I
It is
don't.
interim, then we become another, we have to change what we do and our identity changes entirely, right?
The reason I'm asking it is because I just feel like by pushing that question, it just allows us to have more and more clarity for what we want to do, which is remain in the interim and come back to something.
Yeah,
that's why I push on it, because I mean, otherwise even I'm going to like go off and probably find something else to do. But something around like definitely creative communities of care, create communities of care, creative communities of care, actually, for me. But okay, I will leave it at that. Elizabeth had a follow-on question on your theory, on the theory. Just a quick word on that, Sarah, and then we'll wrap. But is just teaching the theory in the modes where you were just teaching theoretical courses, was that working?
Yes and no. The students got through, they passed, which was we needed to get them through the theory courses so that we could concentrate and have them kind of bring them back to do boot camps, practical boot camps. I was quite surprised in the theory course that I convene. The students, we try to make it as creative as possible, and their submissions were incredibly innovative. They managed to do a lot with very little. So on one hand, yes, I'd say they did. There were some students who had no access to internet at all. So the university implemented a distance program, so where material was couriered to students. And we're about to receive that couriered material back again from students. And I don't know, I'll hopefully in the next week or so, I'll be able to gauge how well those students, because we're not a distance learning institution, but we had to implement this thing. And so I think, yes, they did. A lot felt, students struggled to manage their time. They really struggled to manage their time. We lessened the load for them, but yet they still struggle, because I think in many instances they were looking after the younger siblings. There was no space to work. So it wasn't ideal, but we did it knowing, and this is what we communicated to students, that you need to focus on your theoretical courses so that when we can come back to being on campus together, we can focus solely on your studio work practical course, and that was the carrot that was held in front of the students. So we did it. It was very interim. We did it knowing that we would come back, and we have now come back to contact mode. But it's not ideal. It's not ideal. They didn't do the maintenance. Some of them religiously did the maintenance programs and would email me and say they'd made all sorts of discoveries about their voice. But many were very honest and said, no, they didn't do them. They did them for the first week and then got bored or never had space to do it. So
all kinds of reasons.
And others it didn't.
We had the same experience with our conditioning programs, which we tried to get them to do. I am going to leave it at that. I just want to say that for everyone in the room, that a lot of the spaces that I've been pushing on have also been really Giovanni Fussetti and Amy Russell, in a conversation a few weeks ago, really drew a line in the sand. And I thought it was a really interesting line to hold on to, just because then whenever we depart from that line, we at least do it mindfully and with awareness. And I think that's, you can hear it in everything that Sarah has shared, but it's really a talk worth listening to, as is Amy Russell's. And on the other side, in terms of what is this new genre, what is this new medium, what is this new way of teaching, I really point you to the second talk we had, which was Felipe Cervera's from La Salle. And all of those videos are available. I have a group. I'll send you guys a quick email after this saying thank you for attending this talk. It's on Telegram, which is like WhatsApp, but much more confidential, and the government can't come and find you. And there's a group there called Unrehearsed Futures. And if you have ongoing conversations and you want to take these conversations and questions further, I keep posting interesting links over there as well, but it's just a place for it to be live. So it's on Telegram. I'll send you that link. Again, so next week you have Nicole Stinson coming in and taking the chair. Sarah, so thank you so much for taking the chair and sharing so much, and also being able to say, I don't know to a bunch of things, and also say, well, this is what I do know, and this is what I'm going to try for, no matter what. At least that's the plan until the world throws another curveball at us. But yes, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And there's been a lot to take home and think about. So Nicole Stinton takes the chair, and Aiden, who's been coming to a number of talks from day one, he isn't here today, but he will be the person taking my role with Nicole. And they are just talking completely in this sort of all the celebratory delights that they have found teaching in the mediated space, possibly defining somewhere the beginnings of what the new genre is. And then we have Faye Simpson, who teaches in a number of institutions in New York. I don't have the words on her thing in front of me right now. She popped in for a bit, and now she's not here anymore. But she will be teaching, and we'll do it at a new time. Right now we're doing it at 4 p.m. Our time, and it'll be at 5 p.m. our time. So whatever the start time was right now, it'll be 1 hour later. So hopefully we'll start to begin to get the East Coast more involved, the US East Coast. And Elizabeth can wake up a little later for this talk. Elizabeth's in Jamaica, and I keep saying this because I'm just so amazed that somebody from Jamaica is here. It's great. Wonderful. Thank you, guys, and thank you all for coming. Sarah, if you could stay for a few more minutes, or do you have to run to London right now?
No, not yet. I first have to go to the Dean's Advisory Committee before London.
Oh, so that's in Cape Town. Okay, got it.
I've got time.
So it'd be great. And lovely to see you all. Thank you so much. Look forward to the emails, and check out our blog, because the blog has all of these pieces in written report form in about 4 or 5 pages, distilled as really interesting journal articles that are written by Falguni. And I want to stop the recording now. Thank you, everyone, and you can all head. Yes, please do.
Thank you.